Okay, welcome back to what I think is part 13 of this series of creating a more quote-unquote modern looking WPF application. And we're using some predefined styling by maapps.metro. It's a styling library for WPF. And today we're going to, usually before videos, I go ahead and I determine what I'm going to do in that video and program it out on my own. That way when I'm doing it in front of you guys, it's already done and I know what I'm doing, like start to finish. But in this case, I didn't fully code everything ahead of time and know what I was going to do. So this is going to be like right off the cuff, pretty raw, I guess, of me adding the ability to update some budgets. So if you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about whatsoever, and you're just here for, how do I update something in SQLite and EF Core? I do recommend going back to the very beginning of this playlist, and that way you can follow along and create this from scratch. And of course, all my code will be in the description below. You can find the GitHub repo. And if you like this, don't forget to subscribe. And without further ado, I know that was a lot of plugging. Let's hop into it. So let's try to remember where we were, because it's been a while since I've worked on this. I've been away for a bit. So let's refresh our memories on where we're at. And so far, what we've done is we added the ability to not only select a budget here on the left, and soon we'll be able to add pieces to that budget, so expenses and stuff like that. But what if I want to edit the budget? And that's why we added this icon here, this pencil. So what if I wanted to up this budget to 1,300? Well, right now, hitting this button does absolutely nothing. And what I envision is once we hit on a button, this will come back up, but the fields will be pre-populated, so we can change maybe the date if we need to, or the total budget. And then instead of creating the budget, we'll just update that budget that we hit edit by. So a few things to do. I guess the very first, we want to link this button to the row or the data of that row. And I was looking online how I want to do this. I got an example from Stack Overflow. And what we can do is in the main XAML here, I'm going to close actually or stop the app from running. Let's look at the main XAML of this app. And if we find where that button is, which it's right here, there's a property of this button called command parameter. And we can set that to just the word binding. And what this is going to do, it's just going to be a placeholder to hold all of the data of this row. And also let's give this button a name. And I'll call it edit budget button. And then lastly, let's give it a click event, and we'll just say give us a new event handler like that. So hopefully this works. Let's look at the code behind now. We have this new event handler, and we want to grab the command parameter, which we bound to this row. So I'm going to say button B, let's declare a button, is equal to the sender as a button. And then a budget, and let's just call it lowercase budget, is going to be equal to B, that button dot command parameter. So it's going to grab what's in command parameter. We're going to say that is of type budget, capital B, and we're going to set lowercase budget equal to that. So let's put a breakpoint here and just see what happens when I click on one and make sure we get all of the right data of that row. So here we go. I want to click the first one. We should see these dates, and then 1,200 is the budget. So let's hit F11 to go one more down. Oh, I don't know. All right, let's try this again. There we go. Now we're one line below. So let's hover over budget now, and if we expand it, here we go. We have 1,200. And then hopefully these are the relevant dates. Let's see, 2/1 and 2/5. Was that correct? 2/1 and 2/5, yeah. Awesome. So now there's a few things I want to do after we get the row information. By the way, I might end up editing these buttons here because they don't really look too great, to be honest with you. They kind of look, maybe I can make it transparent so we don't really even see the button itself. I don't know. I'll find a way to make them look a little bit better. But for right now, I guess they'll do. I guess the next thing we want to do is have this visible and expand, and then pre-populate the data from the row that we just clicked edit. So let's close this again. And I'm going to say start date picker, which is the first date dot selected date is going to be equal to the budget that was just grabbed dot start date. And then end date picker dot selected date is going to be equal to budget dot end date. And then lastly, the amount of the total budget. So total budget text box dot text is going to be equal to budget dot budget amount. But remember, we made this a double, and this is expecting a string, so we have to say to string. And let's make this whole stack panel visible again. So budget stack budget, I didn't spell it right. Budget stack panel dot visibility is going to be equal to visibility dot visible. So let's see if that part worked. I'll kill this breakpoint. We don't really care about that anymore. Now, if I click on a budget, see, it pre-populated all of the data again. So here I can say, okay, instead of 1200, let's make this 1300. And then instead of create, this will say update budget. We'll hit it and it'll update it in the database as well. So not only will it reflect here, but if we look at the data in the database or we restart the app, it'll pull up and be 1300 instead of 1200. So this create budget button that we saw before, we actually want to change the content from create budget to update budget. So, and actually I want to have the ability to cancel this action as well. So I'm going to copy this whole button. We're going to put another button right below it. And the name of this is going to be cancel update button. Character casing is going to be normal. That's fine. The click event, let's give it a new one. The content is going to be cancel and then edit. And the style, I don't want it to be the accent color. I want this to be a different color. So let's say dot red. I don't know if that's, we'll see. I don't know if this is going to work. Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay. So let's make the style button dot square, and then let's see, background is going to be red. Let's see how this looks. Okay, so not quite what we want. Actually, I think that will work. The font maybe should be bold, so let's see if I can do that. So font weight, let's make this bold. And now I think it looks a little bit of the same size as the create button, I think. The only difference is it's not white, and if you wanted it to be white, I guess we can do that too. So what I did is I just changed the foreground to white, and now that's white as well. I guess that'll be more consistent having the foreground white. Okay. And then lastly, this is very close to the create budget, so I want to give it a little space. So let's give it a little margin at the top. So left is 0, top, let's give it 10. It looks like that's too much, so maybe 5. So left and right are 0 margin, and then top and bottom are 5 if we make it like this. That gives us a little bit of room. Maybe that's still too much because it's not very consistent with the rest, but that's okay. This looks good. And then by default, let's make the visibility of this hidden, because we don't want to show that if they are just creating a budget. We only want this to be shown when they update. So I guess the next step is that cancel update button dot visibility is also going to be visibility dot visible, so they can click on that and choose to cancel the update. And if they do cancel the update, that's when we'll have to fill in this event handler. Which, by the way, let's go ahead and do. I'm just going to copy this to make it a little easier. And then instead of making a selected date, let's just say the selected date's going to be null. Same here, so null. And then the text is also going to be null. And we'll copy these two things, and we'll say visibility is now hidden. We're going to close that whole form, and then we're also going to hide the cancel update button. So let's see how this works. So if I click on one, this will appear on the right, and let's say I don't want to update this anymore. I'll cancel it. Everything will disappear. If we reopen it again, something went wrong there. Let's see that again. So if we hit cancel, this is still a minus, so we need to change that to That's right. We want to make the visibility of this plus button equal to collapsed instead of hidden. So let's say this is collapsed instead of hidden. And let's restart the app and now see if it works correctly. So hit edit, hit cancel. Now if we hit it again, yeah, it opens up the first click. Before, I don't know if you could tell, I guess. I didn't explain that very well. I don't know if you could tell, but if I hit edit and I hit cancel, before I would have to hit this twice in order for it to show the form. But now we fixed that because we changed it to collapsed, and that's what it was looking for up above. So now we have the canceling all done. I guess the next thing we want to do is change the content of this button. So the create budget button, we want it to say update instead of create. So create budget button dot content is going to be equal to update budget. So now comes the question, what happens when they go ahead and they click on that button, the new update budget button, because really the event that gets fired is still going to be this create budget button click. And I guess the first thing that happens here, we still want it to be the same. We still want to validate it, just because even though they update it doesn't mean they updated it to something that's valid. So I think this part's going to stay the same. However, below we create a new budget and then we add it into the database. That's not what we're going to do. So I'm going to say if create budget button dot content is going to be equal to create budget. So if that button that they click says create budget, let's run this, not equal. There we go. Else, right, the budget button content is update budget. And why is this green? Possible unintended reference comparison. Yeah, I guess we can say dot to string like that. And then else, they're going to be clicking that update. So in that case, what we want to do and what you need to do with EF core is you want to retrieve the budget that you're going to edit. So I'm going to call the database, say, give me the budget that the user is currently editing or wanting to edit, and I'll take it, I'll edit the fields, and then I'll resubmit it with EF core, and it'll know it's an update. So it looks like we're going to have to create a new method in the budget data class called update budget in database or something like that. So let's go to the budget data class and create another method, public static void update budget in DB. And we'll also pass in a budget. So I don't think I'm going to pass in the whole budget. What I'd rather do is just pass in the primary key and then use that primary key to retrieve the budget from the database, edit it, and then send it back. So let's say int budget key. But now comes the problem, how are we going to pass in that key? Because when we get to this point, we have no idea to know what the primary key of that budget is. Or the ID, rather. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just make a private int up here, private int budget ID, and then whenever one is selected to be updated, we'll fill that in and then use that to pass in when we go to update it. So let's add to this method, this click event, and say budget ID is going to equal to this budget up here, its ID value. And then when we go to pass it into this method right here, we'll have it ready to go. I think that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense to you, but maybe when we write it out, it'll make a little more sense. So back in here, we can say using var db is equal to a new budget context and say budget is going to be equal to db.budgets.find, and then we'll pass in this budget key. So let's see if this, and we have to give these parentheses. There we go. So I guess let's take a break here and just see if everything works. And let's call that method that we have started on budget data dot update budget in DB and pass in budget ID, not budget, budget ID. And let's see if we make it that far. And yeah, if now I look at the data, we see that it went ahead and retrieved the budget that we specified with this primary key. Okay, cool. Okay, so now comes the problem. How do we get all of the new budget data over? I guess I can go ahead and pass in each thing individually. So a date time, let's call this start date, a date time called end date, and then a double, or I guess a string, because that's what it's going to be, called budget amount. And so now we can say this budget that we just retrieved from the database, its start time, whether or not changed, it doesn't matter, is going to be the start time passed in, or start date passed in. And then do the same with the end date. Budget dot end date is going to be the end date passed in. And then lastly, the budget dot budget amount is going to be the budget amount passed in, just like this. However, this is a double, so we can do double dot parse and then pass in this. Okay, so like I said, this doesn't really matter if it changed or not, because if it didn't, then we're updating it technically, but it's just going to look the same regardless. And now let's just see if we do db.save changes, if that actually ends up doing anything. So now let's pass in these new parameters into this method and try changing one. So the first one is the end date, so we can do, I guess the first one's the start date actually. So let's pass in this, and the next one is this. And then lastly, we want the text from the amount text box to be in there. So I think this makes sense. Let's try changing one and see if anything ends up happening. And I went ahead and just opened the database in the DB browser just to have it on hand. Let's change this to 1300 when we'll hit update. And now I'm very curious if I refresh. Oh, okay, cool. It did update to 1300, but notice the dates didn't change. That's great because we didn't end up changing any of the dates, but we just changed the budget amount. So perfect, that looks like that part worked at least. If we hit continue, so I guess there's a few more things just to touch up. We want to close all of this, probably put some kind of success message, and also hide this cancel edit button again. And actually, that can all be done by just doing all of this. So I'll copy everything that we did in the cancel, and then right after we call the update budget and database method, we can go ahead and do these things. So let's restart the app. Let's try changing a few things. Let's change a date and the amount and make sure. Let's change this back to 1200 and let's change this date to the second now, and we'll hit update. Continue. And that closed everything. The only thing we didn't see was an update message or a success message. So if we wanted to add that, we can just run this show success method that we created earlier and put it right here. Or actually, let's put it outside of the if else. That way, if it makes it this far for either of these, it's been successful. So one more time, let's just update this. So 1400, hit update. Let me get rid of that breakpoint. Hit continue. And now we have successfully added budget. That's not going to work. Okay, so close. So we might need to make another method called show success update instead. So let's take this and put it back here. So it shows success when one's created, and we'll create a new method to show success when updated. So I'll just basically copy this. Instead of show success, we'll name it show success update, and successfully updated budget is what it's going to say. So let's run that here. Let's start and try updating another one. So 500, update, successfully updated budget. Perfect. And now, just for the sake of things, let's bring this back over, hit refresh, and 1500. So it looks like it's updating the database as we expected it to. We can now edit the budgets. I guess the next big thing we need to do is how do we add expenses to budgets. That one's going to be a little more in-depth probably. It might be multi-part. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully you enjoyed this. It was a little more raw, not as well prepared. So I do apologize if you didn't like that. But maybe that helps you when I kind of just talk about what's going through my mind at the time. But anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully you liked it, and I hope to see you in the next video.